This is just like old times. John Howard spent 30 years in politics, a lifetime. He's the second longest serving Australian Prime Minister, 11 years in government, defeated in 2007 by Kevin Rudd. Lost his seat of Bennelong. He was a regular guest on the program through these years. He's now written the book Lazarus Rising. He's had a lot of attention. I've read it all. I think some of the attention has been quite misdirected, actually, particularly on the issue of Peter Costello. The way I read the reporting is quite different to what I read in the book. But he's in the studio with me. John Howard, good morning.
Good morning. Great to be back. Very nice new studio you have.
Yeah, we thought we'd move up in the world. Now, I wonder if this brings back some memories for you. This was... when was it? Let's see. This was some time ago. I think it was 2001, February 2001. We've got all these people screaming, not enough's being spent on roads, and now we sort of know why. Would you?
No, I mean,
are you saying that?
Hang on, fair go. I mean, don't say
fair go too.
No, don't you say it's half. I mean, the only way you compare those two figures is to annualise them, and one of them is just under 500 million, and the other is exactly 400 million, and 400 million is not half of just under 500 million.
Mr. Howard, you must have been a great spin bowler. The spin on this is extraordinary. Okay, you in fact mentioned in the book that I went ballistic. I thought I didn't go ballistic.
No, I
went adolescent, I did.
I remember that interview very clearly. And I think the book, I mean, I make the comment about you that you know, if I had something serious to say to the public, you let me say it. But if we were on the back foot, you quite rightly saw it as your role to put the heat on the government. And I remember that interview. That was after that Auditor General's report, which was given a very dramatic treatment, suggesting that motorists had been ripped off, that fuel excise hadn't gone into roads, it had gone into consolidated revenue, etc., etc. It was a tough interview. I do remember that, and it actually symbolised the problem that we were in over fuel excise at the beginning of 2001. People thought that as a result of the GST that they'd been shortchanged, that there hadn't been full compensation. Yeah. And although there had been, a tiny bit of the full compensation was an esoteric Treasury calculation about reduced input costs, which it was impossible to explain to the punters. The rest of it was a straight cut in excise. So I decided the only way you'd get it off the agenda was to have a cut in excise, and also to knock off that 6 monthly indexation of fuel excise.
You did use the media and talk radio a lot, didn't you, to try to get a sense of how the public... And in a sense you've set until the current Prime Minister, you'd set a standard on that. Kevin Rudd tried to do the same thing. Yeah,
I didn't avoid the Canberra news conferences. I did talkback radio in addition. I took the view rightly that talkback radio is a way of talking directly to people. You could do an hour-long news conference, and what appears on radio or television in the papers is entirely at the whim of the news editor, what they're going to run. Yeah. So what I said, well, okay, we'll continue to do that, but I'm also going to do talkback radio. I did a very regular program with you, of which I was very grateful.
Do you know, one of the things that, as I read through the book, that came to me, and this might surprise you, I thought it's a grubby business, politics. I mean, you've always been regarded as a man who was a bit above the grubbiness and a man of integrity. But does it have to be as grubby as it is? I'm thinking particularly of the tensions with Peter Costello. I remember we were all being told it's all a media invention, there are no tensions here. But there clearly were tensions.
Oh, look, there were. Peter and I, at a professional inside the government level, worked together very closely, and I would like the enduring takeout of our relationship to be that we work together for the betterment of the country, and that was overwhelmingly the case. There were differences about the leadership, of course, and I felt that I couldn't write a proper autobiography without addressing it, and I decided to address it simply by recording my own feelings, and Peter obviously didn't share my interpretation of some events, and I understand that, and I bear him absolutely no ill will, because he and I agreed on just about everything when it came to running the economy. We had very few disagreements. They were disagreements of degree, they weren't disagreements of kind. I mean, in some areas he probably thought I spent too much money, in other areas I correspondingly thought unless you spent a bit more money you'd be in a lot of political trouble.
But do you remember, for example, doing a spot on Today Tonight with him just before the election?
Yes, I do.
Sitting there like a couple of...
Yeah, it probably didn't work.
No.
No.
But even that was an attempt to sort of convince us of something that didn't happen. I mean, you weren't that close, and that's fair enough. So if you're working together, that's fine. But you weren't close, but here was this, oh, everything's all right, we're actually...
Yeah, we weren't... And it is true that I wasn't personally as flattered to him as I may have been to a couple of my other former cabinet colleagues. That's true, and equally with him. But we didn't have a fractious relationship. We really didn't. That is not.
But he now says it was a bad government.
Well,
in its later years.
If he's saying that, he doesn't mean it. I mean, it was a good government, and he was an integral part of it. I said in the book that he was Australia's best ever treasurer. I said he did an outstanding job with the GST. I said we worked together in close professional harmony, and the underpinning of our economic success was the fact that we worked together.
But I guess the point I'm getting at is there doesn't seem to be room now for total honesty in politics. You couldn't have really both been honest about what was happening between you, or not just that, other issues. You couldn't be totally honest about what was going on because you had to have so much of an eye on the politics and what damage it could do you. Is there room for honesty in politics?
Oh yes, there is room. I mean, I admit there were differences over the leadership, but the point I make is that they only surfaced on a limited number of occasions, and we saw to it that they didn't interrupt the functioning of the government.
But a couple of times you refer to things that you say you did, which are undisciplined.
Yes, of course I was undisciplined.
But such as the interview where you talked about
retiring at
64.
64 and the Beatles.
It's true. It's a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, what the criticism there was that it was leapt upon by sections of the media and was made a big deal. I mean, it was a perfectly legitimate thing to say.
I guess that's my point. Are we able to have an open?
It's discussion? There's this gotcha mentality in politics. Now that was a gotcha problem. I mean, the media leapt onto it. What's all this about? Is he sending signals? Is he doing that? And several, as I say in the book, several of my colleagues got in touch with me and said, "What on earth are you doing this for? You're creating uncertainty." Well, I thought when I gave the answer, I mean, it was my birthday, but I was still in full control of what I was saying. I think I was going off to have a lunch with Fairfax straight after that interview, so I had to be very careful and sober for doing that. And I just thought it was a natural, honest thing to say.
You were desperate to be Prime Minister. You say in the book, Lazarus Ride, you were desperate to be Prime Minister, but you actually gave up on it at one stage. You didn't go on.
I never thought after I was knocked off, and then we lost the 1990 election, and the colleagues made it very clear that they didn't want to go back, and a lot of people backed John Hewson, and John was the flavour of the month, and there was an enormous surge of support for him, and I thought that was that. And the best thing I might be would be Industrial Relations Minister in a Hewson government.
Did you ever, when you were Prime Minister, sort of look in the mirror in the morning and say, "Gee, I'm Prime Minister"?
Yes. There was an element of that in it. I think Geoffrey Blaney, in a review that he's written for the Australian Spectator, made the observation that reading the book he had the impression that I, from time to time, was surprised that I'd actually got there. That is true. I guess that's a product both of my upbringing and also a product of the experiences I had.
Did it make you work harder?
Certainly made me work harder, and certainly meant that when I got there I didn't take it for granted. And I felt you always had to be thinking of the next move, you always had to be trying to understand what people were going to think of you if you did something, believing always that you had to have a reform agenda. And we got into trouble politically on work choices. And one of the reasons we got into trouble politically on work choices was that I felt that we had to keep being seen to be a reformist government. It's easy now to look back and say, oh, work choices was a huge mistake, or one part of it, getting rid of the no disadvantage test. But if we hadn't have done it, everybody would have been onto us, including the media, and the serious commentariat in the media would have been saying, oh, these blokes have lost their reform commitment. It's very interesting. Context is everything.
I was once accused by an interviewer, a person interviewing me, of being driven to try to prove something to my late father. What drove you, do you think? Was it? What were you trying to prove to anybody? Were you trying to prove something to yourself, or what?
Look, I think you were trying to prove something to yourself. I think I was trying to validate the worth of what represented my background, the small business. I was intensely proud of what my parents had done and what they'd lived through. I mean, they lived through those three, the World War One, the Depression, World War Two, and Dad started a business, and he didn't have any money, and Mum had no money. And I was always particularly warm towards people who had started a small business and had struggled, and delivered a better life for their children than they'd had. So honouring that segment of the Australian community was something that I believed in.